Merry Christmas, Hope. Thanks for being here for allowing me to be with you this morning on Christmas morning. And just want to share with you just a few thoughts as we continue our celebration of Jesus coming to earth. And, I'm sure many of you have had this experience that I've had. You're at the grocery store, and like most times when you're at the grocery store, you're in a hurry. And you round the corner, and immediately you see the crowd that's gathered in front of the deli as you hesitantly take one of those numbered tickets, the number that says you're next in line. And you look at that number, and you look up at the number on the wall, and you see that you are 10 numbers behind the current one. And you then endure the long deli lottery as you wait for your number to be called. Now, I want you to keep that in mind while we read a story from Mark's gospel account. So it's in Mark chapter 1, and let me read it to you. Mark says this: After Jesus left the synagogue with James and John, they went to Simon and Andrew's home. Now Simon's mother-in-law was sick in bed with a high fever. They told Jesus about her right away. So he went to her bedside, took her by the hand, and helped her sit up. And then the fever left her, and she prepared a meal for them. And so Mark tells us that Simon's mother-in-law is healed of a fever, and as soon as she's healed, she goes from having a fever to preparing a meal. Pretty dramatic recovery. Then Mark continues. He says, that evening after sunset, many sick and demon-possessed people were brought to Jesus. The whole town gathered at the door to watch. So Jesus healed many people who were sick with various diseases, and he cast out many demons. But because the demons knew who he was, he did not allow them to speak. And so news must have spread about Jesus being in town and about maybe even Simon's mother-in-law, because Mark tells us that later that night, people brought many sick and demon-possessed people to Jesus. Mark says that the whole town was gathered at the door, and I imagine it was a busy, chaotic scene, very much like the deli counter, but much better than deli meat and cheese. People are being healed. And I joke about that, but it sounds like a pretty amazing day. In chapter 1 of Mark's gospel, Jesus launches into this ministry of changing the lives of the people that he encounters. First, Simon's mother-in-law, and then the whole town, it seems. Mark continues and he says this: before daybreak the next morning, Jesus got up and went out to an isolated place to pray. And then later, Simon and the others went out to find him. And when they found him, they said, everyone is looking for you. And so it's early the next morning. It's so early. Jesus is an early riser. He's awake and alone, and it's still dark out. I imagine it had been a wild and crazy day and night of ministry the day before, sort of like a Christmas weekend. Busy with activity, and then finally, Jesus experiences some quiet. And he needs this quiet after this exhausting day. And the disciples come looking for him, and they say, everyone is looking for you. I imagine they were thinking this could be another exciting day of healing and another exciting day of changing lives. I want to tell you that I quickly read over a comment that was made by Mark, and I find it to be significant. Now, maybe it's a throwaway statement by Mark, but what if it isn't? See, Mark said that Jesus healed many people. Mark didn't say Jesus healed all. He healed many. What if Jesus didn't heal everyone that night? You see, I kind of imagine that at some point that night, someone was the last person to be healed by Jesus. And the doors were closed, and the next person would have to wait until the next day. And I imagine that's why the disciples were saying, everyone's looking for you. You see, there are people who were looking for Jesus, possibly people who were there the night before. That there are people, maybe even people waiting since last night, and they're looking for Jesus. You know, this wasn't my original idea. I discovered this while reading a book. It's actually over 30 years old. It's a book called The Prisoner in the Third Cell. And in this book, there's a chapter where the author describes the people who were waiting in line when Jesus finally was too exhausted to continue. He talks about the disappointment they may have experienced in not getting in to see Jesus while others had because the house was so crowded. You see, the disciples said, "Everyone is looking for you." I imagine they're thinking there is still good that can be done in town, that there are still people who can be cared for, there's still people who can be listened to, and there's still people who can be healed. And you know, here is the thing I want you to remember today. I know it's Christmas morning, but I want you to try to remember this thought. Jesus makes this difficult statement. He says this. Jesus replied, when the disciples said, "Everyone's looking for you," Jesus said, "We must go on to other towns as well, and I will preach to them too." And then he says, "This is why I came." Did you hear what Jesus said? What was the reason for why he came? He came for the other towns as well. See, Jesus said one of the reasons that he came to planet Earth, one of the reasons he was in ministry, one of the reasons that he was God with skin on him was for others. You know, sometimes it's really easy for us to only think of Jesus as a personal Jesus, that Jesus is doing a good work in me, for instance. And I want to give you a little personal aside here. You know, for me, Jesus saved my soul. I know the direction my life was headed before I had found Jesus, and my life was off the rails and it was dark. Almost 40 years ago, Jesus rescued me. Jesus forgave me. Jesus literally gave me a new life to live. See, Jesus saved my soul and the church saved my life. I've said that often, that Jesus saved my soul and the church saved my life. I was quite literally starting over in so many ways after my very personal encounter with Jesus. One of the things that happened almost as soon as I surrendered leadership of my life to Jesus, I was invited to lead a youth ministry at a church. Now, I was 21 years old. I was still digging myself out of my former life. I had no idea how to do youth ministry. I just made friendships with kids, and I told them about what Jesus did to me. And here's what I discovered, and it launched my life. I discovered that Jesus belongs to others, that Jesus belongs to all the others. See, my first few years in ministry, I made so many mistakes, mistake upon mistake upon mistake. I didn't know anything about my theology. I didn't know anything about how to do ministry. I mean, I was still in college. I was actually just beginning my second stint through college, but I discovered that there was this excitement of watching others discover Jesus, and I was hooked. It's why I work at a church today. That experience was over 35 years ago, and it changed the trajectory of my life. And I have found that inviting others is the best way to tell others. That creating friendships that can lead to conversations, that inviting others to experience a faith community at its healthiest and best is so exciting and it's so rewarding. And when you see it happen in someone else's life, man, you become hooked. See, this is why Jesus came. He says he came for others. And this is why we, the church, do what we do. So here's my thought for you this morning. When you're standing in the line at Wawa this week, if you dare, I challenge you to do this. Look ahead in line at the employee who's scanning the items and working the register, and then say to yourself, that person is why Jesus came. This is why I need to do what I do. And then pray for that person. Pray for that employee. Pray that their day would be a blessing. Or maybe in the gas station line, with the gas station attendant, as you hand your credit card in and say, fill with regular, I dare you to have this thought. That person is why Jesus came. And this is why we do what we do. This is why we, the church, do what we do. And I challenge you to pray for that person. Maybe even begin a conversation getting to know that person. Maybe when you're standing in line returning your unwanted Christmas gifts, the thing that doesn't fit, the thing that's the wrong color, and you're standing in those Christmas lines and look at the person in front, or maybe the person behind you in line, and know that that person is why Jesus came to earth at Christmas. And this is why we, the church, are challenged to do what we do. This is why practicing invitation is so important. See, there is deep meaning for us when we take up the challenge and understand that Jesus belongs to others, that our relationships, our conversations, our invitations all bring deep meaning as we discover that we can bring Jesus to those others, that Jesus came for the people at your work, that Jesus came for your boss, that Jesus came to earth for your employees, that Jesus came for the people at your school, that Jesus came to earth for your teachers or for your students, that Jesus came for the people you see every day. See, now the disciples, they were well-meaning, I'm sure. There's plenty to do in this town, Jesus. Everyone's looking for you. But let's not ever believe that Jesus is only for some, or for the select, or for the chosen, or for those who are already here. Let's not choose to believe that. Instead, let's choose to believe that everyone isn't here yet, that there are others who still need to hear and know about Jesus. You see, many of us have stories of Jesus changing our lives, of Jesus forgiving our past and Jesus moving us forward. But Jesus came to earth. God so loved the world. And Jesus belongs to the others. All the others that we see each and every day. Jesus belongs to all the others. Every person we encounter, every person we run into at work or school or in our activities, every person Jesus loves, Jesus came to earth and lived a perfect life and was sacrificed so that each person could be in a relationship with him.